The dust storm rolled across the California desert like the wrath of God himself, and Holden Nash could barely see his own hand stretched out before his face as he urged his horse forward through the choking brown cloud that had swallowed the world whole. The year was 1882, and San Pedro had seen its share of fierce weather rolling in from the desert. But this particular tempest seemed determined to bury everything in its path beneath a suffocating blanket of sand and grit. Holden squinted against the stinging particles that found every gap in his bandana, every crease around his eyes, and wondered if he should have stayed at the ranch house instead of riding out to check on the southern fence line. His chestnut mare whinnied nervously, tossing her head as tumbleweeds bounced past like phantom dancers in the murky brown twilight that had replaced what should have been a clear afternoon sky. He was about to turn back when he heard something that made him pull up short. A sound that didn't belong to the howling wind or the rattling of debris against rock. It was a human sound, a cry perhaps, or maybe just his imagination playing tricks in the chaos of the storm. Holden strained his ears, leaning forward in the saddle, and there it was again, faint but unmistakable. Someone was out here, caught in this hellish weather just like him, and by the sound of it, they were in trouble. Dismounting carefully, he kept a tight grip on the reins and moved toward where he thought the sound had originated. The wind tore at his coat, tried to rip his hat from his head despite the leather cord tied beneath his chin, and he had to lean into it with all his weight just to make progress. Then, through a momentary break in the swirling dust, he saw her. A woman was huddled against an outcropping of rock, her body curved protectively over something, her traveling dress torn and covered in dirt, her dark hair whipping loose from its pins. She had her back to the worst of the wind, and even from several feet away, Holden could see she was trembling. But what struck him most was that she wasn't trying to run or seek better shelter. She was staying put, hunched over whatever she was protecting with a fierce determination that spoke of either foolishness or incredible courage. "Madam!" Holden shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm. "Madam, we need to get out of this." She turned her head slightly, revealing a face streaked with dust and tears, eyes wide with fear but also something else, defiance perhaps, or desperation. "I cannot leave him." She called back, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent he couldn't quite place in the chaos. Holden pushed forward until he was beside her, and that was when he saw what she was protecting. A dog, or what might have been a dog once, lay beneath her body. The animal was thin to the point of starvation, its ribs showing clearly through matted fur, and it looked like it might be part coyote with its pointed nose and large ears. The creature was shaking as badly as the woman, its eyes rolling white with terror, but it didn't try to snap or bite. It simply lay there, accepting her protection as though it understood she was all that stood between it and the merciless storm. "We will all die out here if we do not move now," Holden said, but even as the words left his mouth, he was already making calculations. The dog was small enough the woman needed help and his horse was strong. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, her voice steadier now despite the circumstances, "but he comes with us." Any other time Holden might have argued. A stray dog, half wild and probably disease-ridden, wasn't worth risking human lives over. But something in the woman's eyes, in the set of her jaw, told him that arguing would be pointless. She had made her decision, and she would die on this spot before she abandoned the creature she had chosen to protect. "Fine," he said. "Hold tight to him." He helped her to her feet, and she scooped up the dog, which couldn't have weighed more than 20 pounds in its emaciated state. The animal whimpered, but didn't struggle as Holden guided them both to his horse. The mare danced nervously, not pleased with the extra passengers or the continuing storm, but she was well trained and held steady as Holden boosted the woman into the saddle. She settled the dog in front of her, cradling it against her chest, and then Holden swung up behind her, his arms coming around both her and the animal as he gathered the reins. "Hold on," he said, close to her ear so she could hear him. She nodded, and he felt her lean back slightly against his chest, trusting him to guide them through the blinding storm. The ride back to the ranch house felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The wind fought them every step of the way, and visibility remained almost zero. Holden had to rely on his mare's instincts as much as his own knowledge of the land, trusting her to find the path when he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The woman stayed silent during the journey, but he could feel the tension in her body, could sense her awareness of every stumble, every moment when it seemed the wind might knock them all off the horse and into the churning dust. When the dark shape of his ranch house finally emerged from the brown murk, Holden felt a relief so profound it was almost painful. He urged the mare into the barn, which stood adjacent to the house, and the sudden relative quiet as they moved out of the direct wind was startling. The storm still raged outside, but within the solid wooden walls, the sound was muted, manageable. Holden dismounted first, then reached up to help the woman down. She clutched the dog tightly as she slid from the saddle, and her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground. He caught her easily, steadying her with his hands on her shoulders, and for the first time got a clear look at her face beneath the layer of dust and grime. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost out of place in this rough land. Her features were delicate, with high cheekbones and a small, straight nose. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green like new grass after rain, and they studied him with equal parts wariness and gratitude. Her dark hair, though tangled and full of dust, fell past her shoulders in thick waves. She looked to be in her early 20s, not much younger than his own 26 years. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse from the dust and shouting. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," Holden said, more gruffly than he intended. The fear he had felt during that ride, the possibility that he might not get them back safely, was translating into anger now that the danger had passed. "What in God's name were you doing out in that storm? And who are you?" She straightened, and he saw that pride flash in her eyes again. "My name is Rose Brennan," she said. "I am your mail-order bride, or I was supposed to be, I think. The stagecoach driver said he would take me to the Nash ranch, but then the storm came and he said we had to stop. But when I got out of the coach with my trunk, he drove away. He just left me there with the dust coming, and I did not know which way to go." Her accent became more pronounced as she spoke quickly, and Holden finally placed it as Irish, softened by years in America but still present in the lilt of her words. Holden stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. "My mail-order bride. Madam, I think there has been some kind of mistake. I never sent for any bride." Rose's face, already pale beneath the dirt, went whiter. "But the advertisement and the letters." "I did not write any letters," Holden said. He felt a sinking sensation in his gut as pieces began to fall into place. "My foreman, Tucker, he has been after me for months to find a wife. Said the ranch needed a woman's touch, said I was too young to be spending my life alone. But I told him I was not interested." He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a shower of dust. That fool must have taken matters into his own hands. They stood there in the barn, staring at each other, while the storm continued to rage outside and the dog whimpered softly in Rose's arms. The situation was absurd, impossible, and yet here they were. A woman who had traveled across the country to marry a man who had not actually asked her to come, and that man who now had no idea what to do with her. "I have nowhere else to go," Rose said quietly, and Holden heard the edge of desperation in her voice. I sold everything I had in New York to pay for the journey. The little I have left is in my trunk, and that is somewhere out in the desert now. Holden looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet, the protective way she still held that pathetic stray dog. Whatever else she might be, she was clearly at the end of her rope, and he was not the kind of man who turned away someone in need. We will sort this out, he said finally. But first, you need to get clean and warm, and that dog needs food and water. Come on, let us get into the house. He led his mare into her stall, gave her a quick rub-down and some oats, then guided Rose through the connecting door that led from the barn directly into the house. It was a convenience he had built himself, useful for the harsh winters and apparently for dust storms as well. The house was simple but well built, 3 rooms plus a kitchen, with sturdy furniture that Holden had either made himself or inherited from his father. Rose stood in the main room, still holding the dog, looking around with those wide green eyes. Holden could only imagine what she saw: a bachelor's dwelling, clean enough but lacking any of the touches that made a house a home. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, nothing but the bare necessities. The washroom is through there, he said, pointing to a door off the kitchen. I will heat some water for you. There are clean cloths on the shelf, and I can find you something to wear until we can wash your dress. Thank you, Rose said again. She looked down at the dog in her arms. Could I have some water for him as well? And perhaps a little food if you can spare it. Holden wanted to say that the dog should be put back outside, that it was probably full of fleas and disease, that it was not worth the trouble. But he remembered how she had curled her body around it in the storm, how she had refused to leave it even when her own life was at risk, and he found he could not be that harsh. I will see what I can find, he said. He heated water on the stove, poured it into the basin in the washroom, and set out clean cloths and a bar of soap. Then he dug through his chest and found an old shirt that had belonged to his father, smaller than his own things and hopefully not too large for Rose to use as a makeshift dress. When he brought these items to her, she had set the dog on the floor and was trying to brush the worst of the dust from her clothes, but it was a hopeless task. Here, Holden said, handing her the shirt. It is not much, but it is clean. It is more than enough, Rose said, taking it with hands that trembled slightly. You have been very kind. Holden left her to wash while he went back to the kitchen and found some leftover stew from his dinner the night before. He put a small amount in a bowl for the dog, along with a dish of water, and set them on the floor. The animal approached cautiously, sniffing the air, then fell upon the food with desperate hunger. Holden watched it eat and wondered what he had gotten himself into. A mail-order bride. Tucker was going to have a lot of explaining to do when he got back from his trip to Los Angeles. The foreman had left 3 days ago to purchase supplies and was not expected back until the end of the week. That meant Holden was alone with Rose, at least for the next few days, and he had no idea how to handle this situation. He heard the washroom door open and turned to see Rose emerge, and the sight of her made him catch his breath. The dust was gone, revealing skin like cream and those remarkable green eyes. Her dark hair was wet and combed back from her face, and she wore his father's shirt like a dress, the hem falling to just below her knees. She had rolled up the sleeves and belted it with what looked like a strip torn from her petticoat, and somehow she made the ridiculous outfit look almost elegant. I feel much more human now, she said, attempting a small smile. Thank you for the clothes and the water. You are welcome, Holden said, finding his voice. The dog is eating. I think he was half starved. I found him when I was wandering after the stagecoach left, Rose explained, coming into the kitchen. He was caught in some thorny bushes, tangled up and unable to move. I freed him, and he just stayed with me. When the storm got worse, I tried to shield him because he was so small and scared. She knelt beside the animal, which had finished the stew and was now lapping at the water. I know it was foolish to risk so much for a dog, but I could not just leave him. Holden looked at her kneeling there, this woman who had traveled across a continent to marry a stranger, who had been abandoned in a desert storm, and whose first concern had been for a half-wild stray dog. There was something remarkable about her, something that spoke of a core of strength beneath her delicate appearance. It was not foolish, he said. It was brave. She looked up at him, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "You really think so?" "I do," Holden said. "Though it nearly gave me a heart attack when I found you out there." They both smiled at that, and some of the awkwardness between them eased. The storm continued to batter the house, but inside it felt warm and safe, a small pocket of calm in the chaos outside. "You must be hungry," Holden said. "I can heat up more of that stew, and there is bread as well." "That sounds wonderful," Rose admitted. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." As Holden prepared the meal, Rose told him about her journey. She had been working as a seamstress in New York, living in a boarding house with 6 other girls, and barely making enough to pay for her room and food. When she saw the advertisement seeking a bride for a California rancher, something in her had responded to it. The letters that followed, the ones that Tucker must have written pretending to be Holden, had painted a picture of a good man looking for a partner to share his life, not just a housekeeper or a pretty ornament. He wrote about the ranch, about the work of building something lasting, Rose said, as she ate the stew Holden had warmed for her. He wrote about wanting someone who was not afraid of hard work, who understood that life out here would be difficult but rewarding. And he asked about me, about my life and my dreams, as if those things mattered. She looked down at her bowl. No one had ever asked me those things before. Holden felt anger toward Tucker resurface, but it was complicated by the fact that his foreman had apparently been a thoughtful correspondent, even if he had been writing under false pretenses. "What did you tell him? In your letters, I mean." "I told him the truth," Rose said. "That I wanted more than the life I had, that I was tired of being invisible and unimportant, that I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, to help build something that would last." She met his eyes. "I told him I was strong, that I was not afraid of work, and that I would do my best to be a good wife." Her voice dropped. "I thought that would be enough." "It is enough," Holden said firmly. "More than enough. This is not your fault, Rose. Tucker overstepped badly, and I will deal with him when he returns. But right now, we need to figure out what to do." "I understand if you want to send me back," Rose said, though her voice was small and he could hear the dread in it. "I have no claim on you, no right to be here." Holden thought about that. He thought about sending her back to New York, to that boarding house, and that life of being invisible and unimportant. He thought about her curled around that dog in the storm, about the way she had looked at him with trust when he helped her onto his horse, about the strength he saw in her despite everything she had been through. "The storm is going to last at least through tomorrow," he said slowly. "And even after it clears, it will take time to arrange transportation back to town, let alone back to New York. You will stay here until we can sort out the details. We have time to figure out what comes next." Relief flooded Rose's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I will not be a burden. I can cook and clean, I can sew and mend. I will earn my keep." "We will talk about all that tomorrow," Holden said. "For now, you need rest. You can take my bed and I will sleep out here by the stove." Rose looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion was clearly winning out. The dog, which had finished eating and drinking, came over and sat at her feet, looking up at her with devoted eyes. She reached down and stroked its head gently. "What should we call him?" she asked. "We." Holden raised an eyebrow. "Well, I cannot just keep calling him the dog, can I?" Rose said with a smile that transformed her tired face. "He needs a proper name." Holden studied the animal, which looked slightly less pathetic now that it had been fed and was warming up. "How about Dust?" he suggested, "since we found him in a dust storm." Rose laughed, a sound that was like water over stones, bright and clear. "Dust," she said, trying it out. "Yes, I think that is perfect." The dog's tail wagged, as if he approved of his new name, and despite everything, Holden found himself smiling. The situation was still impossible, still complicated beyond measure, but for this moment, in the warmth of his kitchen with the storm raging outside, it felt almost right. He showed Rose to his bedroom, which was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair. She looked around with those observant green eyes, and he wondered what she was thinking. Did she see the loneliness in this room, the stark functionality of a life lived alone? "Thank you," Rose said, turning to face him, "for everything. For saving us, for giving us shelter, for not sending me away immediately. I know I have complicated your life terribly, but I am grateful." "Get some rest," Holden said, not trusting himself to say more. There was something about standing here with her, in the intimacy of his bedroom with her wearing his father's shirt and her hair falling damp around her shoulders, that made him feel things he had no business feeling. She was here under false pretenses. She thought she was his mail-order bride, and he needed to keep a clear head about the situation. He left her there and returned to the main room, where he built up the fire in the stove and settled himself on the old sofa with a blanket. Dust had followed him out and now curled up on the floor nearby, apparently deciding that Holden was acceptable even if Rose was his preferred person. The dog was asleep within minutes, exhausted from his ordeal, and Holden listened to its gentle snoring while his own mind raced. What was he going to do? He could send Rose back, of course. It would be the sensible thing, the right thing. But the thought of putting her on a stagecoach back to New York, back to that life she had described, made something in his chest tighten with protest. And there was the practical matter that she had spent everything she had to come here. Even if he gave her money for the journey back, what would she return to? He thought about Tucker's letters, the ones Rose had mentioned. His foreman had painted a picture of a man looking for a true partner, and the uncomfortable truth was that the picture was not entirely inaccurate. Holden had been alone since his father died 2 years ago, running the ranch with Tucker's help, but coming home every night to an empty house. He was only 26, but sometimes he felt ancient, worn down by the relentless work and the loneliness. But marriage was not something to enter into lightly, especially with a woman he had just met, regardless of how many letters she thought they had exchanged. That would be crazy, impulsive, and completely unlike him. The storm howled outside, and Holden closed his eyes, trying to will himself to sleep. Tomorrow he would think more clearly. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do. But tonight, with Rose sleeping in his bed and a stray dog snoring on his floor, he let himself drift off with the strange feeling that something fundamental in his life had just shifted, like a door opening onto a path he had not known existed. When Holden woke the next morning, the storm had blown itself out sometime during the night, leaving behind an eerie silence. He rose stiffly from the sofa, his back protesting the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement, and looked around. Dust was no longer on the floor where he had been, and Holden could hear movement in the kitchen. He followed the sounds and stopped in the doorway, arrested by the scene before him. Rose was at the stove, still wearing his father's shirt, her dark hair tied back with another strip of petticoat. She was humming softly to herself as she worked, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Dust sat at her feet, watching her with adoring eyes, his tail thumping against the floor whenever she glanced down at him. "Good morning," Rose said, turning and seeing him. "I hope you do not mind that I started breakfast. I woke early and thought I might as well make myself useful." "I do not mind at all," Holden said, and realized he meant it. There was something deeply appealing about walking into his kitchen and finding it warm and full of life, with the smell of good food and a pretty woman smiling at him. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Rose said. "Better than I have in months, actually." "Your bed is much more comfortable than my cot at the boarding house." She blushed slightly. "I hope you are not too uncomfortable on the sofa." "I have slept in worse places," Holden said, which was true enough. "That coffee smells like heaven." She poured him a cup, and he took it gratefully, savoring the strong, hot brew. Rose served up the bacon along with eggs she had found in his cold box and some bread she had toasted over the stove. They sat at the small kitchen table, with dust lying between them, and ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. "I should ride out and see if I can find your trunk," Holden said finally. "The storm will have buried it in sand, but if I can figure out roughly where the stage left you, I might be able to locate it." "That would be wonderful," Rose said, "but please do not put yourself to too much trouble. I know you must have work to do." "The work can wait a day," Holden said. "Besides, you cannot spend the rest of your time here in my father's shirt, no matter how well you wear it." Rose blushed again, a becoming pink coloring her cheeks, and Holden found himself smiling. She was easy to be around, he realized. Despite the strange circumstances, despite the fact that they were essentially strangers, he felt comfortable with her in a way he had not expected. After breakfast, Holden saddled his horse and rode out to search for the trunk. Rose had given him the best description she could of where the stagecoach had stopped, and he knew the main road well enough to make educated guesses. The landscape was transformed by the storm, with new drifts of sand covering familiar landmarks and tumbleweeds piled against every rock and fence post. But Holden had lived in this country all his life, and he knew how to rate it. It took him nearly 3 hours, but he finally spotted a dark shape half buried in sand near a distinctive rock formation about 5 miles from his ranch. He dug it out, finding it to be a battered trunk with brass fittings and Rose's initials carved into the lid. R.O. The lock had been damaged by the storm, and the trunk had clearly tumbled some distance, but when he opened it, he found the contents relatively intact. Dresses, undergarments, a few books, a small box with what looked like jewelry and keepsakes. Everything a woman might bring when she was leaving her old life behind and starting a new one. Holden secured the trunk to his saddle and rode back to the ranch, arriving in the early afternoon to find that Rose had been busy in his absence. The house smelled of soap and cleaning, and when he carried the trunk inside, he saw that she had swept the floors, washed the breakfast dishes, and somehow managed to make the main room look more inviting despite not having moved anything except to clean around it. "You found it," Rose exclaimed, her face lighting up when she saw the trunk. "Oh, thank goodness. I was so worried it would be lost forever." "It took a beating, but everything inside looks all right," Holden said, setting it down. "You can use the bedroom to change if you like." Rose carried the trunk into the bedroom, and Dust followed her, apparently having decided that wherever Rose went was where he belonged. Holden smiled at that and went to check on his horse, giving Rose privacy to go through her things. When she emerged 20 minutes later, she was wearing a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was properly pinned up now, and she looked every inch the proper young lady. But there was dust on her hem from cleaning, and her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, and Holden found that combination of refined and practical incredibly attractive. "Much better," Rose said, smoothing down her skirt. "Though I must say, your father's shirt was surprisingly comfortable." They spent the rest of the afternoon working together. Holden had fences to mend from the storm, and Rose insisted on helping, bringing him water and tools, learning the names of the different pieces of equipment. She asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle and the horses, about how long he had been here and what his plans were for the future. Her interest seemed genuine, and Holden found himself telling her things he rarely discussed with anyone. His father had started the ranch 20 years ago, he explained, carving it out of rough desert land through sheer determination and hard work. Holden had grown up here, learning the business from the ground up, and when his father died suddenly from a heart ailment, he had been devastated but determined to keep the legacy going. The ranch was not huge, but it was profitable enough, with good water rights and decent grazing land. He had 12 head of cattle currently, with plans to expand, and 3 horses besides his own mare. "It sounds like you have built something to be proud of," Rose said as they walked back to the house in the golden light of late afternoon. "Your father would be pleased, I think." "I hope so," Holden said. "Sometimes I wonder if I am doing it right, if I am making the choices he would have made, but I do my best." "That is all anyone can do," Rose said softly. That evening they fell into an easy routine. Rose cooked dinner, a better meal than Holden had eaten in months, made from the simple ingredients in his pantry but prepared with skill and care. They ate together at the table, talking about inconsequential things, and then Rose insisted on washing the dishes while Holden saw to the evening chores. When he came back inside, he found her sitting by the stove with a book from her trunk, and dust curled up at her feet. "I have been thinking," Rose said, setting down her book as Holden took a seat across from her, "about this situation we find ourselves in." "I have been thinking about it too," Holden admitted. "I understand that I came here under false pretenses, even though I did not know it at the time," Rose said carefully. "And I understand that you have no obligation to me, no reason to let me stay beyond basic hospitality. But I want you to know that what I wrote in those letters was true. I do want to build something lasting. I am not afraid of hard work, and I think, if you were willing to give this a chance, we might actually suit each other quite well." Holden looked at her, this brave woman who had crossed the country on the promise of letters written by someone else, who had shielded a stray dog with her own body in a dust storm, who had spent the day cleaning his house and helping with ranch work without complaint. There was something remarkable about her, something that called to the lonely places inside him. "I am not looking for a housekeeper," he said slowly. "If that is what this would be, I can hire someone for that." "I am not offering to be your housekeeper," Rose said, meeting his eyes steadily. "I am offering to be your partner, your wife, if you will have me. I know we barely know each other. I know this is strange and sudden, but people have built marriages on less, and I think we could build something real together." "What if it does not work?" Holden asked. "What if we find we cannot stand each other after a month?" "Then we will deal with that when it happens," Rose said. "But I do not think we will. I think we are both practical people, both willing to work for what we want, and I think we could be happy together given time." Holden stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening desert. His mind was at war with itself. The practical part that said this was too fast, too risky, too crazy, battling with another part that whispered this might be exactly what he needed, what he had been looking for without knowing it. "I need time to think," he said finally. "This is not a decision to make lightly." "Of course," Rose said, and he heard no resentment in her voice, only understanding. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." That night, Holden insisted Rose take his bed again while he slept on the sofa. But he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman in his bedroom and the choice before him. Marriage had always seemed like something far in the future, something he would get around to eventually when he had more time, more money, more something. But here was Rose, offering herself as a partner, asking for nothing except a chance. What would his father have done? Holden wondered, but he knew the answer to that. His father had been a man who seized opportunities when they presented themselves, who was not afraid to take calculated risks. He had come to California with nothing and built a ranch through determination and hard work. Would he have turned away a woman like Rose? By morning, Holden had made his decision. He found Rose in the kitchen again, making breakfast, and the domesticity of the scene struck him anew. This could be his life, he realized. Morning after morning, coming into a warm kitchen with good food and a beautiful woman who smiled when she saw him. The alternative was what he had now, years stretching ahead in solitude, coming home to an empty house, eating cold meals alone. "Rose," he said, and she turned to face him, a question in her eyes. "I have thought about what you said, and I think you are right. I think we could build something good together." Her face transformed with joy, and she took a step toward him before stopping herself. "You mean it? You truly want to try?" "I do," Holden said. "But I want to do this right. I want us to have time to get to know each other properly before we make it official. Would you be willing to stay here as my guest for a few weeks? We can see how we get along, see if this is really what we both want. And if it is, then we will get married properly with everything done right." "Yes," Rose said, her smile radiant. "Yes, I think that is a wonderful idea." They shook hands on it, a formal gesture that made them both laugh, and then they had breakfast together while making plans. Rose would stay in the bedroom. Holden would continue on the sofa until they married. She would help around the house and ranch as she felt comfortable, but he would pay her a small wage so she would not feel dependent on him. They would spend time together, talk, learn about each other, and at the end of the trial period, they would decide together if marriage was truly what they wanted. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt natural almost immediately. Rose proved to be everything she had claimed in her letters and more. She was an excellent cook, taking his simple ingredients and creating meals that made Holden look forward to coming inside at the end of the day. She kept the house cleaner than it had ever been, but not in a way that made him feel like he had to be careful or uncomfortable. She sewed curtains for the windows from fabric she found in her trunk, brightening the rooms and making them feel more like a home than a place to sleep between work days. But beyond the domestic skills, Rose showed herself to be genuinely interested in the ranch and its operation. She learned quickly, asking intelligent questions about the cattle and the land management. She helped with the easier chores, feeding the chickens Holden had forgotten he owned until Rose found them scratching around behind the barn and started collecting eggs. She made friends with his horse, bringing her treats and brushing her coat until it gleamed. And Dust, the little stray dog that had started this whole thing, thrived under Rose's care. He filled out as he ate regular meals, his coat became glossy, and his personality emerged as playful and affectionate. He followed Rose everywhere, but he also started to warm up to Holden, sitting with him in the evenings and even coming along when Holden rode out to check the herds. Tucker returned at the end of the first week, and Holden was ready for him. The foreman took one look at Rose hanging laundry in the yard and knew immediately that his scheme had been discovered. To his credit, he did not try to lie or make excuses. "I know I overstepped," Tucker said, standing in front of Holden's desk in the small office at the back of the house. and I will understand if you want to let me go over it. But boss, you have been alone too long, and when I saw that advertisement from the marriage broker, I just thought it might be a way to help." "You had no right to make that kind of decision for me," Holden said, his voice hard. "You put Rose in an impossible position, lied to her, and brought her all the way across the country under false pretenses." "I know," Tucker said, hanging his head. "I am sorry, truly sorry. I will pack my things if you want me gone." Holden looked at his foreman, who had worked for his father for 10 years before Holden took over, who knew the ranch almost as well as Holden did himself. Tucker was 50 years old, had never married, and treated Holden almost like a son. His intentions had been good, even if his methods were unacceptable. "I do not want you gone," Holden said finally, "but you need to understand that you cannot interfere in my personal life like that again. Rose and I are working things out, no thanks to your meddling, but that does not excuse what you did." "I understand," Tucker said, relief evident in his weathered face. "And for what it is worth, I am glad it is working out. That young lady seems like good people." "She is," Holden agreed, and found that he meant it completely. Tucker went to the bunkhouse that served as his quarters when he was not on the range, and Holden went to find Rose. She was in the garden patch behind the house, which had been overgrown with weeds until she decided to tackle it. Now neat rows were beginning to emerge, and she had plans to plant vegetables for the coming season. "Was he very angry?" Rose asked, straightening up and pushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Tucker, I mean, did you dismiss him?" "No," Holden said. "He apologized and I gave him another chance. He is a good man, just overly involved in matters that do not concern him." "I am glad," Rose said. "I would hate to think I cost him his position." They walked together back toward the house, and Holden found himself reaching out to take her hand. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact beyond helping her on or off a horse, and Rose's fingers curled around his with a naturalness that made his heart beat faster. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Is there anything you need, anything that would make you more comfortable?" "I have everything I need," Rose said. "More than I ever had in New York. A comfortable place to sleep, good food, meaningful work, and pleasant company. What more could I ask for?" "Is it enough, though?" Holden asked, stopping and turning to face her. "I know this is not what you expected. I am not the man who wrote those letters, and I am worried that I might not live up to what you were hoping for." Rose looked up at him, her green eyes serious. "You are better than what I was hoping for," she said quietly. "The man in the letters was charming with words, but you are kind in actions. You saved me from the storm, you have given me a home, you treat me with respect and consideration. You let me help with the ranch work, even though most men would say it is not proper for a woman. You have been patient while we figure this out together. How could I not think you are better than any letters?" Holden felt something shift in his chest, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I am beginning to think this was meant to happen," he said. "All of it. Tucker's meddling, the dust storm, even finding you with dust. Maybe this is how it was always supposed to be." "Maybe it is," Rose agreed, squeezing his hand gently. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the house, Holden did not let go of her hand right away. They stood there on the porch, looking at each other, and Holden knew with sudden certainty that this was right. Rose was right. This whole improbable situation was somehow exactly what he needed. The days turned into weeks, and the trial period they had agreed upon passed almost without notice, because everything felt so natural. Rose transformed the ranch house into a true home, but more than that, she became essential to Holden's daily life. He found himself thinking about her during the day, hurrying through his work so he could get back to the house and see her. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Rose told him about growing up in Ireland, about coming to America as a young girl after her parents died, about the years of hard work and loneliness in New York. Holden told her about his childhood on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the grief of losing his father and the weight of carrying on alone. They discovered they liked many of the same things: quiet evenings by the fire, the satisfaction of a job well done, the beauty of the desert at sunset. They discovered they disagreed on some things too. Rose thought Holden worked too hard and did not take enough time for rest. Holden thought Rose was too generous with the ranch hands and would give away everything they had if he let her. But these disagreements were minor and easily resolved through compromise and discussion. Physically, they remained careful with each other during this time, maintaining a respectful distance. But there were small touches. Hands brushing as they worked together, Holden's hand on Rose's back as he guided her around a muddy patch, Rose adjusting Holden's collar before he rode out in the morning. Each touch felt significant, charged with an awareness that was growing between them. One evening, about 3 weeks after Rose's arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. Dust was asleep at their feet, and the air was finally cooling after another hot day. Rose leaned back in her chair, looking content, and Holden realized he could not imagine his life without her now. "Rose," he said, and she turned to look at him. "I think our trial period has run its course. I do not need any more time to know what I want." "Neither do I," Rose said softly. "Will you marry me?" Holden asked. "Not because of letters or arrangements or because you have nowhere else to go, but because I want you to be my wife. Because I think we can build something real and lasting together. Because I am falling in love with you." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, because I am falling in love with you too, and because I cannot imagine being anywhere else but here with you." Holden stood and pulled her to her feet, and then, for the first time, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise and a question all at once. And when Rose kissed him back, her arms coming up around his neck, Holden felt like everything in his world had finally fallen into place. They were married 2 weeks later in San Pedro's small church, with Tucker and a few other ranch hands as witnesses. Rose wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Holden had bought her on a trip into town, a cream-colored silk that made her look like an angel. Holden wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed by Rose's careful hands, and tried not to be too nervous as he stood at the altar waiting for her to walk down the aisle. When Rose appeared, her hand tucked into Tucker's arm since she had no family to give her away, Holden's breath caught. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was his. This remarkable woman who had traveled so far, who had survived a dust storm, who had refused to abandon a stray dog, was choosing to spend her life with him. The knowledge was humbling and exhilarating all at once. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Holden said, "I do," and slipped the ring onto Rose's finger, he meant it with every fiber of his being. And when Rose said, "I do," in return, her voice clear and strong, he saw in her eyes the same commitment, the same determination to make this marriage work. They had a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with Tucker and the hands and a few neighbors who had made the trip. Rose had prepared food for days, and there was music and dancing and laughter. But through it all, Holden was aware only of Rose, of her hand in his, her smile, the way she looked at him like he had hung the moon. When the last guest finally left and they were alone in the house, Holden felt a moment of nervousness. They had been careful with each other for weeks, respectful and proper, But now Rose was his wife, and the barrier that had existed between them was gone. He need not have worried. Rose came to him naturally, stepping into his arms like she belonged there, and when he kissed her this time, there was no restraint, no holding back. This was his wife, his partner, his love, and he let himself feel all of it. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that felt both new and familiar. Rose was shy but eager, and Holden was careful with her, wanting her first time to be good, to be special. And when they finally came together, it felt like the final piece clicking into place, making them truly one. Afterward, they lay in bed together, Rose's head on Holden's chest, his arms around her, and talked softly about their future. They wanted children, they agreed, though not right away. They wanted time to be just the two of them first, to strengthen their bond and build their partnership. They wanted to expand the ranch, to make it successful enough to support a family. They had dreams and plans and hopes, and they shared them all in the intimacy of that first night together. The first year of their marriage was not always easy. They learned each other's rhythms, figured out how to work together and live together. Rose discovered that Holden could be stubborn when he thought he was right, and Holden learned that Rose had a temper when she felt she was not being heard. They had arguments, but they learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to compromise. And they learned that making up after a fight could be sweet, that admitting you were wrong did not make you weak, that love meant sometimes putting the other person's needs ahead of your own pride. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Rose's organizational skills and eye for detail complemented Holden's knowledge of ranching and hard work. They bought more cattle, improved the property, built a better barn. Tucker proved invaluable, and he and Rose developed a warm friendship, though he never stopped apologizing for his interference even after they told him repeatedly that they were grateful for how things had turned out. Dust, the little dog that had started everything, became a beloved member of the family. He was smart and loyal, learning to help herd the cattle despite his small size, and always sleeping at the foot of their bed at night. Rose said he was good luck, their lucky charm, and Holden could not disagree. 2 years into their marriage, Rose told Holden she was pregnant. They were sitting at the kitchen table, having breakfast on a spring morning, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby growing in here," she said, her eyes shining with joy and a little fear. "Our baby." Holden felt like his heart might burst. He stood and pulled Rose into his arms, holding her carefully, overcome with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am sure," Rose said. "I have been sure for a few weeks, but I wanted to wait until I was certain before I told you." "This is the best news I have ever had," Holden said, kissing her temple, her cheek, her lips. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy for Rose. She was sick in the mornings, tired all the time, and as she grew larger, she found the California heat oppressive. But she never complained, and Holden did everything he could to make her comfortable. He hired a woman from town to help with the housework so Rose could rest. He brought her cool drinks and fanned her when the heat was worst. He read to her in the evenings and rubbed her swollen feet and told her she was beautiful even when she insisted she looked like a whale. Their son was born in November of 1884, a squalling, red-faced baby with a surprising amount of dark hair. They named him Henry, after Holden's father, and from the moment Holden held his son in his arms, he knew what true love was. This tiny, perfect human was part of him and part of Rose, a symbol of everything they had built together. Rose was a natural mother, nursing Henry with patience and love, singing to him in Irish, teaching him the world with gentle hands and soft words. Holden marveled at her strength, at how she managed the baby and still helped with the ranch, at how she made everything seem easy even when he knew it was not. Henry grew into a sturdy, happy toddler, curious about everything and fearless in a way that terrified both his parents. He loved the horses and the cattle, and Dust appointed himself the boy's guardian, always nearby when Henry was exploring. The house rang with laughter and childish chatter, and Holden sometimes had to stop what he was doing just to take it all in, to appreciate how much his life had changed. When Henry was 3, Rose became pregnant again. This time it was easier, as if her body knew what to do. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1888, a tiny, delicate baby with Rose's green eyes and Holden's nose. They named her Margaret, after Rose's mother, and called her Maggie from the start. 2 children made the house even more lively, even more full of love and chaos and joy. Henry took his role as big brother seriously, always trying to help with Maggie, always wanting to show her things and teach her. Holden expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. The ranch continued to prosper, providing well for them all, and Holden and Rose began to be known in San Pedro as one of the most successful ranching couples in the area. The years passed in a blur of work and family, of challenges met and overcome, of small joys and large triumphs. Henry grew tall and strong, learning ranching from his father and eventually becoming an essential part of the operation. Maggie grew into a smart, spirited girl who loved books and horses in equal measure, and who had her mother's gift for organization and her father's stubbornness. Through it all, Holden and Rose's love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their early years mellowed into something steadier and stronger, a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. They still had their arguments, still had moments of frustration and disagreement, but they had learned how to navigate those waters together. On their 10th anniversary, Holden took Rose on a trip to Los Angeles, leaving the children with Tucker and making a rare break from the ranch. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, walked along the beach, and remembered what it was like to be just the 2 of them. On their last evening, as they watched the sunset over the Pacific, Rose leaned against Holden's side and sighed contentedly. "You ever regret how we started?" she asked. "The strange way we came together." "Never," Holden said firmly. "It was not what I planned, not what I would have chosen if someone had asked me, but it was exactly what I needed. You were exactly what I needed. I used to wonder sometimes what would have happened if you had sent me back," Rose said. "What my life would have been like if you had decided I was too much trouble, too complicated." "I never considered that," Holden lied, and Rose laughed because she knew him too well. "Yes, you did," she said. "I know you did, at least for a moment, and I do not blame you. It was a mad situation." "Maybe," Holden admitted, "but only for a moment. Because even then, even in the middle of that dust storm when I had no idea who you were or why you were there, I knew there was something special about you, something worth taking a chance on. We have built something good, have we not?" Rose asked, looking up at him. "We have built something extraordinary," Holden said, kissing her forehead. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, more building to do, more life to live." They returned to the ranch refreshed and even more committed to each other and to their family. The children were growing, the ranch was thriving, and Holden and Rose began to think about the future, about what legacy they wanted to leave, about how to ensure that what they had built would last beyond their own lives. Tucker retired when Henry was 15, old age finally catching up with him. He built a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property, and Holden and Rose made sure he was comfortable and cared for. He spent his days sitting on his porch, watching the ranch operate and playing with his grandchildren, as he called Henry and Maggie. He never married himself, but he seemed content with his role in their family. And when he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, they mourned him as one of their own. Henry took over more and more of the ranch operations as he got older, showing his father's knack for the work and his mother's head for business. At 20, he married a girl from San Pedro, a sensible, pretty young woman who reminded Holden a bit of Rose in her practicality and warmth. Maggie went to school in Los Angeles, one of the new colleges that accepted women, and came back with ideas about improving cattle breeding and modern ranch management that initially made Holden skeptical but which Rose encouraged. As Holden entered his 50s, he began to slow down, letting Henry take over more of the day-to-day operations while he focused on the larger business decisions. He and Rose had more time together, time to take walks in the evening, to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, to remember all the years that had brought them to this place. They had been married for 25 years when Rose became seriously ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then fever, then a weakness that no amount of rest seemed to cure. The doctor from San Pedro came out, looked grave, and spoke in low tones about lung ailments and limited treatments. Holden refused to accept it. He brought in doctors from Los Angeles, from San Francisco, anyone who might be able to help. But the prognosis was always the same. Rose's lungs were failing, and there was nothing to be done. She faced it with the same courage she had shown in the dust storm all those years ago, the same strength that had carried her across a continent to start a new life. She did not complain, did not rage against the unfairness of it. She simply tried to make the most of the time she had left, spending it with Holden and their children and grandchildren, who had started arriving as Henry and his wife began their own family. "I am not afraid," Rose told Holden one night as they lay in bed together, her breath labored but her eyes clear. "I have had a good life, a wonderful life. I have loved and been loved. I have built something that will last. What more could anyone ask for?" "I need more time with you," Holden said, his voice breaking. 25 years is not enough. 50 years would not be enough. "Then we will make every day count," Rose said, taking his hand. "We will not waste time on regrets or fear. We will love each other as hard as we can for as long as we can, and that will have to be enough." And they did. For the next year, as Rose slowly weakened, they made every moment matter. Holden cut back on his work even more, spending his days with Rose, reading to her, talking with her, simply being with her. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the house with life and love. Dust, old now himself, lay at the foot of Rose's bed, never leaving his post, as faithful in her illness as he had been in health. Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm spring night in 1907, with Holden holding her hand and moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. She was 50 years old, and she left behind a husband who loved her more than life itself, 2 grown children who adored her, 3 grandchildren who would grow up hearing stories about their remarkable grandmother, and a ranch that stood as a testament to what she and Holden had built together. Holden grieved deeply, as anyone would who had lost their other half, but he did not let the grief consume him. He had promised Rose he would keep living, keep working, keep being there for their family. So he did. He found comfort in his children and grandchildren, in the rhythms of ranch life, in the memories of all the years he had shared with Rose. He lived for another 15 years after Rose died, remaining active and involved in the ranch until the very end. He watched Henry's children grow up, saw Maggie marry and start her own family, saw the ranch expand and modernize in ways he and Rose had never imagined. And he never forgot the woman who had arrived in a dust storm, shielding a stray dog with her body, and changed his life forever. When Holden died in 1922 at the age of 66, he was buried next to Rose on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their children arranged for a simple headstone that bore both their names and a single line. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued to operate, passed down through the generations, and while it changed and adapted with the times, it always remained the Nash Ranch, always carried the mark of the man and woman who had started with nothing but determination, love, and each other. Years later, Henry would tell his own grandchildren the story of how their great-grandparents met. He would talk about the dust storm, about the mail-order bride who was not really ordered, about the stray dog that Rose had protected with her own body. He would tell them about Tucker's meddling and the trial period and the deep love that had grown between two strangers who took a chance on each other. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, amazed by the romance and adventure of it all. They would ask questions. Did the dog really live? Yes, Dust lived to be 14 years old, ancient for a dog. Did Great-Grandpa really fall in love with Great-Grandma when he found her in the storm? Well, maybe not right in that moment, but soon enough. Were they really happy? Yes, Henry would say they were truly, genuinely happy, even through the hard times, even when things were difficult. They had chosen each other, worked for each other, and loved each other, and that had made all the difference. The story became part of the family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder of where they had come from, and what was possible when two people committed themselves to building something together. The ranch that Holden and Rose had started with 12 head of cattle, and a lot of hope, eventually grew into one of the most successful operations in Southern California. But it never lost the essential character that they had given it. A place of hard work and love, of family and loyalty, of dreams made real through determination and partnership. Maggie, in her old age, would sometimes stand on the hill where her parents were buried and look out over the land they had loved. She would remember her mother's laugh, her father's steady strength, the way they had looked at each other even after decades of marriage, like they were still discovering each other. And she would think about the dust storm that had brought them together, about the strange circumstances and unlikely beginning that had led to such a beautiful life. "Thank you, Tucker," she would whisper to the wind, acknowledging the foreman whose meddling had started it all. "Thank you for seeing what they could not see themselves." Because in the end, that was what it came down to. Sometimes love arrived in unexpected ways, in dust storms and through mail-order bride advertisements, and in the protection of a stray dog. Sometimes it took courage to recognize it, to accept it, to nurture it into something lasting. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that love would grow into something so strong and true that it would outlast your own life, becoming a legacy for generations to come. Holden and Rose's story was one of those rare, beautiful tales where everything worked out, where two people who should have been strangers became soulmates, where a beginning born of deception and misunderstanding transformed into a marriage built on honesty and trust. They had their challenges, their struggles, their moments of doubt and fear, but through it all they had each other, and that had been enough. The ranch still stands today, though it has changed hands outside the family now. But the house that Holden built and Rose made into a home is still there, carefully preserved. The hill where they are buried is protected, a small family cemetery where generations of Nashes now rest. And sometimes, when the wind blows in from the desert, stirring up dust and memories, you can almost imagine a young woman curled around a frightened dog, waiting for rescue. You can almost see a cowboy on a chestnut mare, pushing through the storm, finding the person who would change his life forever. Their story reminds us that love is not always neat or expected, that it does not always follow the rules we think it should. Sometimes it arrives in chaos, in the middle of a disaster, when we are at our most vulnerable and uncertain. Sometimes it asks us to take risks, to trust in possibilities, to believe that something beautiful can grow from the strangest beginnings. And sometimes, if we are brave enough to say yes, to take that leap of faith, to shield the vulnerable and open ourselves to the unexpected, we find that the love we thought we were not looking for was exactly what we needed all along. That is what Holden found when he rode into that dust storm and discovered Rose. That is what Rose found when she chose to shield a stray dog and trust a stranger. They found each other, and in finding each other, they found home. The legacy of Holden and Rose Nash is not just the successful ranch or the family they created. It is the reminder that love, real love, is built through choice and commitment, through daily decisions to show up and work and care. It is the knowledge that partnership means something, that two people working together can accomplish more than either could alone. And it is the understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, if we are only brave enough to recognize them and hold on tight. So when the desert wind blows and the dust rises, remember Holden and Rose. Remember that a mail-order bride who was not really ordered, a cowboy who was not really looking, and a stray dog who needed protecting all came together in a storm and created something beautiful. Remember that love is always worth the risk, always worth the leap of faith, always worth fighting for. And remember that the most extraordinary stories often start with the simplest act of courage, choosing to care when it would be easier to walk away. That was the true heart of their story, the lesson that their descendants carried forward through generations. Not just that Holden and Rose fell in love, but that they chose each other every day afterward. They chose partnership over pride, understanding over anger, love over convenience. They built their marriage the same way they built their ranch, with hard work, patience, and an unwavering commitment to each other and to the future they were creating together. And in the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the land or the money or even the family, though all of those mattered. Their greatest legacy was the example they set of what love could be when two people truly committed to making it work. An example that inspired their children, their grandchildren, and everyone who heard their story to believe that love was possible, that happy endings were real, and that sometimes the best things in life really do come from the most unexpected beginnings. The dust has long since settled from that storm in 1882. The world has changed in ways Holden and Rose could never have imagined. But their love story endures, a testament to the power of choice, courage, and commitment. A reminder that sometimes fate works in mysterious ways, bringing together two souls who were meant to be together, even if they did not know it yet. And somewhere, on a hill in California overlooking land that still bears their mark, two headstones stand side by side, united in death as they were in life. Together they built a legacy of love. Together they proved that the best stories are not the ones we plan, but the ones we have the courage to live. That is the story of Holden Nash and Rose Brennan, the cowboy and the mail-order bride who found each other in a dust storm and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. It is a story of hope and courage, of unexpected beginnings and beautiful endings, of two people who took a chance and found everything they had ever wanted. And it is a story that reminds us all that love, true love, is always worth believing in, always worth fighting for, and always, always worth the risk.